So next on the stage is Jamie Murdock. He's going to be talking about the greatest buzzword of 2018, threat hunting, and how you can get in on the action in a talk called The Marriage of Threat Intelligence and Incident Response. Let's give him a nice hand.
Thank you. So before I begin, I want to obviously say thanks to B-Sides Pittsburgh. It's my first time being here, and so being an attendee and a speaker the first time is pretty awesome. So thank you everyone for that. I wish it wasn't at this venue because I'm already down like 40 bucks in the casino. So that's, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. So yeah, this talk is threat intelligence and incident response and how we can utilize that in actual threat hunting. So before I actually begin, since we are at 3:31, I like to have fun at my talks. If you've ever been in any of my talks, I like to have fun. I like to have some crowd participation. So after this gentleman sits down, anytime that somebody comes in because they're late, we're going to point at them and laugh. Does that work? Stand by. Ha ha. So, all right, let's get started. Oh yeah, that's the second part of that. I forgot. So our marketing department actually like redid my slides because they look like crap because I do them. And they said, hey, can we take a crack at your slides? And I was like, yeah. So they made some like really cool shit that I wouldn't have done. All right, so let's get this out of the way. This is about me. I am the security program manager at MRK Technologies. I've been doing this for about 20 years. Most of my focus in my career has been on security operations, threat intelligence, and incident response. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Your career is great. Everyone likes to have a good career, but I don't identify myself as my career. I identify as a father, as a husband, as a former Marine, and as a gamer. Yep, because I'm a super nerd. Oh yeah, and at Bodoc if you want to follow me on Twitter, but I just like retweet everyone else's shit, so it doesn't matter. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to focus on what threat hunting is, and it's nothing new. I mean, yeah, it's an awesome buzzword for 2018 if you want to sell some stuff, but it's been going along. We've been doing threat hunting for a long time. It just didn't have that cool name. So we're going to kind of get into how all that ties into play with incident response, with threat intelligence, and how to bring all that together so you can go back to your organization and go, hey, I want to do some threat hunting because it's really cool. Sound good? I hope so because you're here. So threat hunting is the new hotness for 2018. Sorry, threat intelligence, you're not hot anymore. Now it's threat hunting. So from a show of hands, who has heard of threat hunting? Ooh. You like that? Ooh. So how many, now it's the same show of hands, how many heard of threat hunting before 2017? A few of us, right? Ish, right? But it wasn't called threat hunting. It was just part of our job when we tried to figure out if we had an intruder in the environment. But marketing gets a hold of things and says we can sell so much service and product if we actually label it a name. To me, threat hunting starts with your incident response program. Now, I've given a lot of talks on incident response, and I've given a lot of tabletop plays for incident response. And what drives me nuts is, is we have tabletop exercises that we do in our organization. How many here, if you want to raise your hand, do a tabletop exercise in your organization? Good. It's a lot better. It actually grows every year, and that's awesome. Now, for those of you who raise your hand, how many of you include more than just IT functions in your tabletop exercises? Awesome. If you're not, it's probably not your fault. You've probably tried to get business units and HR and the C-suite and everyone else involved, but they're what? Thank you. They're too busy. I don't have time for that. That's an IT function. That's not us. That's the absolute wrong answer. It is critical to have groups like HR, legal, corporate communications, operations, senior executive management. Now, for those of you who have not done a tabletop exercise, anyone, why do you think that's important to have a group, these people in the room when you're doing incident response talks? If they're not in the room, nobody cares. It's absolutely right. We as IT folks, information security or different IT silos, we are not responsible for incident response. We have this much to do with it. If you really look what incident response means, we have this much to do with it. Everything else is the business side, and we're going to talk more about that. But when we come to incident response, raise your hand if you want. If not, that's fine. How many people in your organization or an organization maybe you worked at before did not have a formal incident response plan? And I understand there's probably people who are like, oh, I'm not raising my hand. And that's fine. You'd be surprised the amount of organizations that do not have an actual incident response plan. Not only do they not have one, they don't think it's important. Not only do they not think it's important, there are companies which names you would be like, oh, I know them. Very large name brand organizations that think incident response is something that falls in line with disaster recovery. How many people here think would agree with that? Incident response falls in line with disaster recovery. Good. No one. So what I'm going to get ready to show you is a traditional incident response model. Probably as everyone has seen this before, right? Classic phases: preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, post-incident activity. This is the incident response model 101. I agree with this. For the context of this talk, however, when we're talking about threat hunting, I have a little bit different approach to it. Okay, never mind. Again, marking into my slides, and I thought I had something different. I don't. That's cool. So the way I look at it is actually starting with detection as the first stage in incident response. And we're going to go through all these stages so you can kind of get an understanding of why. So detection, analysis and threat intelligence, containment, hunting, eradication, post-incident, preparation. Now, I know it seems a little weird, so bear with me until the end. To get into the guts of what we're going to do here, let's start with detection. Detection is pretty simple. That is like the easiest part of what we're going to do in this entire process of threat hunting. We're going to identify a security event. Now, notice I said security event. Haha. It's a security event. We don't know if it's an incident yet. It could be, Jamie locked his password because he changed it and his phone is going crazy trying to authenticate. Is that a security incident? If that's what happened behind it, no, it's an event. So we need to identify the event, determine if it's an incident. Now, most importantly, and if anyone's been through a true incident, this next step is actually extremely hard to do. Record all the steps, tools, and analysis for post-incident activities. Now, who here has been involved in an incident before, like a legit oh shit incident, right? How many of you remember to write down everything that you did? Couple. That is extremely hard to do because when you're trying to do 15 different things, communicate with 30 different people, and identify what the next step should be, it's hard to actually write everything down. Now, if you're in a room and you have the core team of incident response together, like the IT silos and security, it's a little easier because you can go, guess what your job is? You're going to write everything down. A scribe. This guy knows what I'm talking about. So what do we use for identifying a potential incident? Well, we use our monitoring and detection systems. We're going to use our SIM. We're going to use our lateral movement detection platforms. We're going to use whatever we have at our disposal to say, hey, this is something you might want to look at. In that space, in detection, we're going to get one of the key things we're going to utilize throughout the entire process: indicators of compromise. Is everyone familiar with the term indicators of compromise? Okay, cool. I can skip that. So we have all this stuff now. We know something happened, but we don't know exactly if it's an incident or not. But we have some basic indicators of compromise. And those come from the details when we start our analysis. We're going to have, hopefully, some basic things like source and destination addresses, ports, any other signs like hashes, signatures for different detection platforms, domain names, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on, right? Well, we need to look into each one of these because even though the source IP address might be 10.1.1.5, and I know that that's this server over here. Okay, well, let's look at that server because it's part of this potential incident, and let's see what else is going on with it outside of what we know it's talking to. Let's not miss any other data. When you run through an incident, if you haven't done one before, the biggest mistake you can make is assuming that your analysis is complete. You have to run everything to ground. I've been involved in incidents before for clients, and I said, what have you done? And they give me the whole list. This address was talking to this, and we know it's doing this, we know it's bad, and we know it's talking to this bad stuff. Cool. Have you seen what else it's talking to? No. Why not? Because I'm not seeing it on it's not showing red on this dashboard. Okay, well, you know it's involved in an incident of some kind. Why aren't you looking to see if there's anything else it's communicating with? So when you go through and you do all this analysis and you're looking at these different things, communication streams, potential droppers, anything it is, you want to document all that information. It's going to become key when you start creating indicators of compromise to go hunting. It's also going to be key when you do your after action report and whenever you do a write-up. So hopefully you're updating your playbooks, if you have any, to next time be able to just run through it. We're also going to look at, and we're going to investigate other results. So how many here call somebody in the security community and go, hey man, have you seen this before? I highly suggest that anytime you're asked that again, you raise your hand. I mean, look to your neighbor. Right now, look to the left. Come on, y'all, seriously, look to the left. I'll stand here all night. Look to the right. These are your peers. These are your peers. These are people you should be able to call and say, hey, have you seen any an increase in activity of O365 compromises from Africa? Why? I didn't want to name a specific country, but yes. You know, you should be able to reach out to somebody in the community and ask that. So that's where this comes from, and further investigate any results from other searches. And now, obviously, you don't have to say, hey, guess what? Right now, we're in the middle of a breach, and we have PII flowing out the door like it's water. You don't have to say that. All you have to say is, hey, have you seen this before? You know, let's utilize the skill sets in our community. How many people have heard of threat intelligence? Everybody, right? Threat intelligence last year was the new hotness. Now it's threat hunting. Next year it'll be, threat something. Anyway, every time I give a presentation on threat hunting, I lead off with, or threat intelligence, I lead off with, threat intelligence is more than just ones and zeros. And it truly is. Threat intelligence is any threat to an organization, whether it's cyber, whether it's physical, whether it's business related, whether it's brand reputation, that is a threat. However, for the purpose of this talk, we're only going to focus on the ones and zeros. But just keep that in the back of your mind. Threat intelligence is any threat to an organization. So when we start looking at this, and we're using it as part of our exercise for threat hunting in our incident, threat intelligence, if you don't think you've done it before, I guarantee you have. How many people have used Google to look something up that they're working on? Everyone raises their hand. Yep, that's threat intelligence. Congratulations, you're now all threat intelligence experts. It's called open source intelligence, OSINT. Open source intelligence, just like it sounds, is anything that is readily and publicly available for you to gain information on. My favorite source of OSINT has been and continues to be so far Twitter. Twitter's awesome. It's not as awesome as it used to be back in the early 2000s when, I'm going to attack Bank of America on this date because they, screwed up my checking account. That stuff used to be plastered all over Twitter, so you kind of knew who was doing what, who was just trying to make a name for themselves, all the fun stuff so you could actually track threat actors. Unfortunately, they kind of evolved, have gotten smarter, they went down to the dark web more, but still, there's still a lot of good stuff in open source intelligence you can get. So if you've looked up, is this IP malicious? You've done threat intelligence. I mean, it literally is that simple. It's not like you have to spend your time in a dark room creating a false persona to get invited to a forum on the dark web that'll actually get you somewhere else where you can go hire a hacker and get even more information. Now that's like legit hardcore threat intelligence, but you can do threat intelligence without having that. Anyone familiar with that screen? 1, 2, 3, 4, few, yeah. So, and this is not product placement in any way, shape, or form. This is a free service offered by Alien Vault. It's called OTX. It is a great resource for threat intelligence. So what I have here is something I was looking at, and this is legit. This is something I actually worked on, and I went to OTX, and I said, what is this host name? Because I saw communications path to it. I put in the host name, and it pops up. Does this thing have a laser? Let's see if I screw anything up. Boo boo. So I look up the host name, and I see it has a pulse. If you're not familiar with OTX, a pulse means somebody has created something that includes whatever that search term was. So I go to the pulse, and then I start getting all this information here. So those are MD5 hashes that are associated with this pulse. If you can't read that up there very well, the pulse is basically, it's this botnet miner for cryptocurrency, and it has a reference, and then it has tags. And you can see in the blue, and it says indicators of compromise, somewhere around there, indicators of compromise 51. Well, on this specific pulse, there's 51 MD5 hashes. Sometimes those are also IP addresses, domain names. It depends on what they found and who found them. So I said, there's a reference on this. I want to see what somebody wrote up about this. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this goes into what this botnet does, how it operates, and one of the most important things is, I think it's there. No, it's down there. Right there. Infected with NSA arsenal, spread through SMB 445. That's some awesome information to have if you're defending and you're trying to contain, right? You know exactly what port that this specific botnet anyway, this specific cryptocurrency miner is trying to utilize. So we put that away. There's also some other information there. Again, this was open source intelligence, and it took me a whole 2 or 3 minutes to get this information because I knew where to go and look. So again, we saw we have a host name. We knew it was doing something bad. We gathered some intelligence and discovered it was on this nasty botnet. So what would good old Elon do? This is where we play participation. So based on what we just saw, so we have SMB port 445, infected with an NSA arsenal. Now Elon wants to know, what do we do now? Block 445. What else? Boom. Utilize what we saw in those hashes in 445. Look for any other communications. What else could we do? Close. You can't chuck the computer into space, but you can nuke it from orbit. Anyone else? Going? You get my empty bottle. I don't have any swag, sorry. Yeah, we can grab that computer. We know that in this scenario that we've seen it communicating, we know some bad shit's going on. So let's focus on that computer. We have potentially patient 0. So in this rough scenario, we've looked, something popped up, said, hey, this is bad. We've done some intelligence on it. We've analyzed it. Now we need to start the process of stopping the bleeding. If you've been in an incident before, you know that it does not go this fast. However, for the sake of time, we're skipping really fast through this. This is the hard part. You have to balance business needs with what your gut tells you. Your gut might say, and as a security purist, right, we're going to block 445 right now. However, and this is where it comes into play that senior executives, all these other business units have to be involved. We can say block 445. But if there's a mission critical business application that utilizes port 445, whose decision is it to make that, or who makes that decision for us? It ain't us. Whoever makes the most money is usually correct. But it's going to be somebody who has the authority to say, we're going to block this, or we're not going to block this. We're going to assume the risk, and here's why. That's why it's critical for, yeah, go ahead.
You also have to factor in whether or not one of the attackers might be there.
Man, stop reading my slides ahead of time. No, I'm just kidding, but you're absolutely right. You know, there's a lot of factors that go into this. Excuse me. So, I'm a professional, it's all right. So, now I'm good. But it's critical to have business units involved. I can't say we have to block 445 and we're going to do it right now. But I can, as the security expert in my organization, say, here's the risk if we don't. Here's what we know about this specific attack vector. Here's what we know about this specific cryptocurrency mining botnet. If we choose to assume the risk and not block 445, here's what can happen. Then it becomes a business decision. We have to empower business makers to make the right decision. And if they don't, that's when we kind of throw our hands in the air and we get really mad and we say we're screwed and go drink. Does everyone understand that part?
The go drink part?
No. Cheers. No, the business part. Because that's critical. I've worked in a lot of organizations that didn't know to make the right decision because the right technical folks didn't give them the right advice. They just said, you have to, you have to, you have to, without providing them the risk if they don't. So communicating risk is how you actually speak business. Because if you say everything from a security perspective, they're going to be like, no. But if we tell them what the actual risk is, they're going to listen, hopefully. So let's have some fun. Now we're going to start talking about actual threat hunting, or as I like to call it, the stuff we normally do anyway. Threat hunting, we're going to detect the intruder. We've done that, right? We've gone through our detection phase. We're going to prevent them from getting a stronger foothold. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Put your thinking caps on because I'm going to be asking some questions about that. And then most importantly, we want them out of our network. As soon as we can get as much information as we can to contain them, to figure out how they got in, how to correctly get them out, and then execute that to eradicate, that's important. However, this gentleman brought up a good point we're going to hit here in a second. You have to balance that with how much you want the intruder to actually know that you know, right? So that's a game of chess that we're going to talk about. Who's familiar with TTP? Not OPP, TTP. All right, good, a bunch of us, that's awesome. So it's tactics, techniques, procedures. It's what an attacker does, it's his standard methodology. Most attackers have the same TTP. Most of it's a business. I mean, the days of, teenager in the mom's basement are pretty much over for real attackers. For those of us who have gray in our hair, we remember when that was like a big problem, and I wish that was the biggest problem right now. We have sophisticated states, we have criminal organizations, we have all this other stuff. It is literally a business. The reason TTPs exist is to model who's doing what from a threat actor perspective. And we're going to talk a little bit about something that I love very shortly. But the main thing to get out of this is TTP. That's how we identify attackers. That's how we kind of, puts a DNA to who's doing what toward us. Who knows this? The old pyramid of pain. So what the pyramid of pain shows is from the bottom up, how much can we trust an indicator of compromise? And how often do we see them? So as you see on the bottom, you have hash values. Well, you can see hash values all day long. And they're the least trustworthy actual indicator of compromise you can have. We're going to talk about a lot of these. Then you get up to the top, which is true TTP. It's the hardest to actually get, but the most reliable indicator of compromise that you can utilize. So, any questions on this slide? We're going to talk more about each one, but just in general. Anyone look at this and go, I disagree? Because you could be right. I don't know. I didn't write this. Nope. Okay. So when we talk about indicators of compromise, file names weren't even on the pyramid of pain because, let's face it, if I drop something on your system and you use it, you go strictly off my file name, I am the worst hacker ever. If my malware or my exploit that I wrote can be defeated because you can pick it up by a file name, I suck. It's probably something that I taught my kid to do for fun. However, when we start looking at hash values, I'm not saying hash values are not a good indicator of compromise, they are. But how easy is it to change a hash? It's extremely easy without having to do a lot of rewriting of my exploit or my malware or my ransomware or whatever it is. Host names. Now we're getting a little bit better. However, host names can be changed very easy too. You throw something in a fastflux botnet, fastflux DNS botnet, that host name goes out the window. But why is it harder to change a host name if you're talking, in our example where we have a cryptocurrency botnet? Why is it harder for them to change a host name than a file hash?
They want to get paid.
They want to get paid. What else? Imagine that you have that botnet set up and you wrote this code. Maybe you obfuscated it or it's encrypted or whatever, but how do you know, how does it know who to talk to? It's because you put a host name in. So if my host name gets detected and it becomes a true indicator of compromise and it gets flagged, I need to rewrite it. That means I have to change my host name. Ports. Same thing. I think ports are a little bit better from an indicator than a host name is, though. Because, yeah, I can utilize IP addresses or fastflux DNS or any of these fun little things to do. But at the end of the day, I'm writing this code to work across a certain communication stream. So it's harder to change what ports it's utilizing than it is a host name or even the hash of the file itself. Because then I have to completely rewrite a big portion of my code to say, all right, well, now I'm going to use this protocol over this port instead. Everyone get that? Cool. This isn't the end. That bringing it all together shouldn't be there, but hey, I'm not marketing. So when we look at everything that we've gone through so far, though, we saw something, and we decided this is an incident. We have an alarm in my SIM, for example, and it said this is communicating to a potentially malicious host. So I looked it up. Yeah, sure as shit, it is. We saw the host name it's communicating with. So we took that information and we utilized open source intelligence to find out more information about the host, and it turns out it's part of a crypto mining botnet. We followed the standard steps of incident response, so we went through our detection and analysis, and we used indicators of compromise and threat intelligence to get more and more information. So that's where we're at currently. So now, let's use that and let's go hunting. Threat hunting is very simple. Like I said, it's the new buzzword for 2018, and it seems like it might be something that's difficult, and maybe it's something scary because you haven't heard of threat hunting before, but more than likely, if you've ever ran an incident through, you've done some sort of threat hunting. At the end of the day, we're taking indicators of compromise that we have found, or maybe we created them, and we're going to go in our environment and start looking for those indicators of compromise. We're going to start looking internally for any signs of this threat in this case. Now, you can do a full threat hunting exercise where you basically go in blind, kind of like doing like a black box pen test. And you can do the same thing, or use the same methodology, to go hunting inside. The best way to do this, if you have the capability, is any of these indicators of compromise that we have found or that we've created, we put into our monitoring and detection systems. We spent $250,000 each, probably, roughly, for all these different systems. Well, you put these indicators of compromise in there, and you start writing content. For example, with your SIM, I can put that host name in and say, if anything talks to this, it's a priority 1 critical alert, notify everybody. Or I can take one of those file hashes, or any of the other things that I've found and write indicators for them, and then put it into my system so it'll let me know. That's the easiest part of threat hunting, especially if you have more advanced systems that you can push through and automate it, or if you can script it yourself to go through and just start pushing it out and automate it. There's a lot of different things you can utilize. The pyramid of pain, again, that's the biggest threat hunting takeaway, I would say, is to remember that. What's at the bottom, you're going to see the most, but it's the least reliable. Up top is where we actually get into stuff you can hang your hat on when it comes to identifying and profiling malicious actors. So before I get into eradication, let's talk a little bit about TTP a little bit more in depth. When you think of, I don't know, let's say Microsoft, and this analogy has been used many times, you've probably heard it before. When you think of Microsoft, you think of a company that pushes out product that's a global leader in all sorts of stuff. However, maybe their product isn't that great sometimes from a security perspective. Maybe we need to patch it every once in a while. Maybe they have a really good tech support crew, though. Actual threat actor groups are just like that, but with better product. There's help desk. You can do ransomware as a service, for example. You can do ransomware as a service. You can do anything malicious as a service now. You can hire a hacker, all this fun stuff off the dark web, right? Now, think about when you first started with your current employer. You probably had to go through some kind of orientation. You probably had a procedure manual or a policy manual or something like that you had to go through. You probably had some kind of run book or help desk help desk knowledge base or whatever. It says, if you see this, do this. Right? If you have not been through that, raise your hand. Yep, everybody, right? These groups do the exact same thing. They have playbooks. They have scripts for the help desk. If they have an issue with the customer and there's a problem with the code, they get on it like that. There is better tech support and dev work, sorry, devs. There's better dev work on the bad side. Why do you think that is? Money. Money, money, money. Product. The product they put out is their name. If their name goes south, their product's going to go south because somebody else is going to come up and eat them alive. So when you think about that, right, we said that they have their policies and procedures and runbooks and everything like that. When we go back to the pyramid of pain, the very top thing was what? TTP. How hard is it going to be for me as though I lead a malicious group and I have all y'all as my employees? And this is how we're going to write our code. This is how we're going to distribute it. This is how we're going to bill clients, etc. And then all of a sudden, some researcher comes along and can identify the methodology in which you code and to tell that that's you. Because you're a Russian-based group, however you like to code in Chinese to throw somebody off. However, you're not fluent in Chinese, so there's indicators that that's not Chinese. And then all of a sudden, that gets tagged back to you. Now, you have to completely go back and change how you do things because you've been busted. That's why that little top piece of that triangle is so critical. You have that, and you can say definitely, Charles Yost wrote this code because I can tell because I've seen other code that he's written before. He's not a bad guy, though, usually. But that's why it's so critical. I can change a file hash all day long. I can do all these other things. But once you start messing with my business product, it is extremely difficult for me to come back from. Just like any other software. If you find a major vulnerability in, I don't know, WordPress or WordPress plugin, it may take, especially if it's a plugin, and then that company or whoever wrote it has to go back through and completely rewrite it from scratch, that causes a problem for them. So, just wanted to make sure everyone kind of got a good understanding of the TTP piece of the house. So let's talk about eradication now. What have we done so far? We found some stuff, we looked up some stuff, we found out some more information, we've thrown some stuff in on monitoring and detection. We may have scripted some stuff to go through and look at other stuff. So we've done a lot of stuff. What we haven't done is made sure that everyone's out, all the bad guys are out of our network yet, though. So when we do that, we have to think of a lot of different things. This gentleman brought up one of the most important things before, and that is, do you tip off the intruder? Or at what point do you tip off the intruder? There might be times, and it's a business decision, so we have to educate the business side and the C-level on the right risks, but we have to let them know what's going on and what our plan is. For example, this system is compromised. It's the admin assistant for the CFO. We know it's compromised. However, we don't want to pull it off the wire, and here's why. We want to do live memory forensics. We want to do all these other things. We want to see who it's talking to. We want it to go through its paces so we can trap more and more information to create more and more indicators of compromise. That sounds great, but at what cost? What's going to happen if we let that happen? Exactly. That comes to the business side of the house. Now, I put my business hat on. I say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I understand that you want to get this information and how critical it is, but at what cost? What's going to happen if I let you do that and let it run its course? Does that admin assistant have access to the CFO's calendar? More than likely. So if the CFO has a meeting on there with director of operations for Disney. Well, that's business intelligence information that I can sell. Hey, guess what? Jamie Murdock Incorporated has it looks like a major meeting with Disney for operations. So if I leak that information and say, hey, Disney is looking for security operations work, they probably have an issue, I wouldn't buy Disney movies or whatever it is. So that's business intelligence. That's one little thing just because of a calendar. Imagine what they can get if they had access to the full inbox of that admin assistant, who, by the way, probably can do what? Send on behalf. So if they can send on behalf, what else can they do? Phishing, full access to that email account, all sorts of things. So for us in security, we want to, like, hey, let's keep this machine open because there's a lot we want to do, but sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have to say the right thing for the business is to pull the plug on this thing, do some disk forensics. We lost our capability to memory forensics, but it's what we had to do. Yes, sir. So the gentleman asked, can't you tip them off also if you use open source intelligence? Possibly. For example, if I take the code and upload it to, let's say, VirusTotal, and I'm sitting there and I'm the bad guy developer, and I monitor that looking for my code to show up, then yeah, especially if I customize that code for you. If I wrote a custom exploit or a custom piece of ransomware or malware based on the recon that I did of your organization, and I'm looking, then yes, absolutely.
So what would you suggest on how to use the open source? Because even, let's say you're looking at something where you're trying to look up the website, right? And there's a lot of open source things for looking up a website. And if they see that their website was put in there, you're not uploading something to VirusTotal, but you're just looking at the website. How do you suggest handling that?
Good question. I like your thinking. I want to talk to you more. So what the gentleman was saying is, not only just like VirusTotal, but, looking up the website or other things like that. What I do is, and who's familiar with Tails? The ISO, security ISO threat intelligence? I utilize Tails through a VPN, through somebody else's Wi-Fi, like Starbucks or something like that. That way, yeah, I might upload their code, but it's not directly tied back to that organization. So yeah, as the bad developer, I'll get nervous because I'm like, oh shit, somebody saw my code. I wrote this specifically for them. But it's not necessarily definitive on it was, Jamie Murdock at, B-Sides Pittsburgh, for example. So yeah, it's, I hate the word, but it's like tradecraft stuff, right? When you're actually doing the intelligence work, there's other things that go behind the scenes other than a couple of slides in a presentation.
So your beginning example with SMB using the NSA tools. I don't want to say that's a bad example, but your reaction to that would be different because it's warmable. And anything warmable you would want to eradicate first and contain. before you would worry about tipping off your attack.
100% agree. So if you didn't hear what the gentleman said, in the example I gave, because of the capabilities of what that can do, it can spread. I'm just paraphrasing the words. So you would want to contain that as soon as possible, and you're absolutely right. Damn you for catching me, but you're right. I'm not afraid to admit I was wrong on that. But no, you're absolutely right. In that situation, you would definitely, not jump the gun, but jump right into that containment. Okay. So I'm going to go through these a little quick. Eradication. Most of the stuff you guys already know. We can do host isolation through various different things. Pulling the host completely off the networks, putting it into a separate VLAN so you can keep communications alive, all sorts of different things you can do with the host. You can do segmentation. And I'm not talking about a full-on architect level, network engineers, everyone involved, segmentation. I'm saying if a field office in Oshkosh, Wisconsin is the one that we believe had the initial source compromise, then we can segment them off completely. We can look at very, 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 very difficult things like removing the host at layer 1. And removing the host for forensics. And this is what we were talking a little bit about before. Obviously, if you do that, say goodbye to memory forensics unless you've already done it. But that goes a lot into what we have to do with business units. Post-incident. So we had an incident, just to kind of bring us up to speed. We had an incident, we went through, we did our detection analysis, we did all that fun stuff, we gathered indicators of compromise, and we went looking in our environment. Now, we think we're all done. However, we can't just assume that because we believe we've eradicated, everything's good to go. I worked an incident for a very, very large global manufacturer that got hit by a specific threat actor group from Asia. Guess the country. China, yeah, imagine that. Went through, made recommendations, here's what we need to do to not let this happen again. Cool. Guess what happened about 3 months later? Hey, what's up? Again? Did you guys do anything we recommended? No. Okay. So you have to continue with a shields up posture. That's the point. When you look at your post-incident, you're going to be gun shy anyway. You're going to see an account lockout and you're going to be like, call everybody. We're getting hacked again. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to document all the steps we took and put that in our analysis. Post-incident activities are critical in any kind of incident. Most of us who go through an incident, we do all of our work, it's done, and we just kind of leave it at that. We don't do an after-action report. We don't do an improvement plan. We don't prep anything for senior management, the C-suite board of directors, or anything like that. We're just like, whoo. Yeah, that was bad. So, what we have to do is an after-action report and improvement plan, an AAR-IP. This is based on everything we did for this incident. The steps that we took. This goes back to the documentation when we first started this discussion. All the steps we took, what we found, the indicators of compromise we created, how we went through our environment to verify we didn't see anything else like that. All these important things. Usually incidents are put into a ticketing system of some kind. Bye, Justin. Usually these things are put into a ticketing system of some kind. Do not close that incident. Do not close that ticket until you have gone over the after-action report with the whole incident response team. Because the reason I say that, when you go to the entire incident response team and you're talking to somebody from corporate communications or HR or legal, they might want you to do something else. For example, they might say, those systems that you did forensics on, I also need you to take those, we need to do a legal hold, we need to do, we're calling in the FBI, we need to do a chain of custody and all this other stuff. That's still part of the incident. So that needs to be added back into that after-action report. don't close it until everyone's been communicated to. And that, again, includes all members of the incident response team. Again, we're going to push out any of the new IOCs that we found to our monitoring and detection systems. We're going to create new rules and content and monitoring and detection platforms. So what does that mean? Haha. No one? Okay. That means if I saw communication on port 445, and it's utilizing, and it's associated with this, this IP or this host, then complete shields up, wake up everybody. Create content. If we discovered any avenues of approach that can be blocked, or that we can do better work to help prevent another, breach or ransomware or anything else from happening, we need to do that. And that's included in that after-action report improvement plan. The improvement plan, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, basically says, here's what happened during an incident. When we were going through, we discovered that we have no egress filtering in the company. And this led to this happening. So an improvement that we recommend would be egress filtering. So things like that, closing avenues of approach. Now, the last step in my model here is usually the first step, which is preparation. The reason why I have it as the last step is hopefully you have a plan of some kind, whether it's formally documented and there's a formal policy around it, or it's like, hey, I know that if something happens, I'm going to call Kevin, and Kevin's going to kick things off. The reason I have it last year is because I want to put a lot of focus on it. We're going to take everything that we learned during this incident, everything we gathered from threat intelligence, any of the information we found during our threat hunt, and we're going to put that, update our incident response plan. We're going to communicate all, well, not all, but as much of the information as we can to our employee base. Let's say it was phishing. Maybe the original attack vector was phishing or spear phishing. So we're going to communicate with our employee base, hey, phishing sucks, don't do it, that typical stuff. Maybe it was because somebody came in and installed a device or software and we allowed it. Well, education on that is we need to have a serious look at policy change and then putting procedures and technology maybe in place to not allow that anymore. Like, I don't know, not let everybody be local admin on their box. Something that might sound simple, but it's very difficult for some people. And most importantly, because this all does relate back to a business discussion and business decisions, update policies and procedures. It may sound simple, it may sound trivial even, but policies are your teeth, procedures is what we do. That being said, I'm out of bullet points. Any questions? Yes, sir. Sorry, you beat me up.
The things I find most for smaller companies, this is like the Cadillac, it happens. I you have any suggestions for us? Good luck. They say, look, we're not going to chase dollars, so forget that. Just keep an image, figure out what happened and how it happened, and then re-image and fix the flaw, and let's move on.
I'm going to be right over here pretty soon because I think I may have gone just a little over, but I'm going to be right over here. Yeah, I do have, okay. All right, so on that, it starts with baby steps. So if you go to an organization and say, or let's say you're working in a small organization and you say, I want to start doing threat hunting, it's going to be really beneficial for us. And they laugh and they're like, no, you're not. We don't have time for that. It's probably the same reaction you get if you say, hey, I think we should do internal pen testing. We don't do that. We're we make widgets or whatever. Anytime that you want to have a successful project, let's say for security, always, always, always has to align with a business goal. So if you can identify a business goal to relate to, doing an exercise similar to this, and show the benefit of, taking a couple indicators of compromise and looking around a little bit, kicking the tires, so to speak. Align it to some kind of business goal. Nothing gets security sold better, well, a breach does. Outside a breach, Nothing gets security sold more than being able to relay it to a business discussion. For example, how many have heard, we're security, we're not but a burden? Everybody, right? My suggestion to that has always been, hell yeah, we're a burden, and embrace that. Don't try to show that, well, we kind of make a profit, or if you don't do this, then we could lose. No, we are a burden. We are not only a burden in the organization, we are the most important burden you can have in this organization, and here's why. Does that kind of help? I mean, I can get more into it afterwards, but yeah. Any other quick questions? Yes, sir. I'm coming back to you, too. Threat intel feeds. So what I will say about threat intel feeds, there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of good things that you can get. My personal opinion is you can get open source threat intelligence feeds or do it yourself, probably better than you can for paying for them. If you don't have the in-house capabilities or the bandwidth to do that on your own, and then paying for them is not a bad thing. Just keep in mind, a lot of times when you pay for a threat intelligence feed, it's kind of like I talked about before, the ones and zeros. You can do darknet scraping now, but it's darknet scraping that they utilize in a lot of these things is no more than an algorithm that you can run yourself. You had a question. All right. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So let's say I do my hunting and I find all these nifty indicators. 5 years from now, I'm still alerting on them. How often would you recommend going through and kind of re-vetting those?
So the question is, he finds all these indicators, went threat hunting, found indicators, how often, and he's still seeing the alerts like 5 years from now, how often do you kind of go back and reevaluate that? It's a good point. That kind of ties into your threat feed thing. For example, if you go to most threat intelligence feeds and it says, 1.2.3.4 is a bad IP address, maybe it was 5 years ago, but maybe now it's not. But it's still listed as malicious because most people who keep those feeds do not update those feeds. I know one specific feed that does update, banned list by Binary Defense. They do go through and revet the feeds. So very similar to that. If you're still seeing alerts after 5 years, if you're still seeing alerts a couple months afterwards, then I would suggest you do not just taking this stuff that I did and do a full threat hunting engagement. Whether you do it, you have somebody else do it, whatever, you definitely want to get super in the weeds at that point. Number two, you can look at what the indicator compromise is that you're seeing, look to the person to your left or right, ask if they've seen something like that before, do some more research on the specific indicator that you're still flagging on, because you might still have issues inside the network. It could be a false positive. So the key thing to that with any piece of intelligence is always to vet the intelligence. So vet that IOC. Maybe it's not legit anymore. Maybe it's, who knows, maybe the IP address got bought by Google and, it's just a communication stream with Google. All right, I'll be right over here if anyone else wants to talk. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you coming out.